So how do we understand what we study? We all know that studying without understanding is, well, it's just a waste of time, isn't it? So are there any evidence-based techniques that can help us, sort of understand what we study better? In this video, I'll be discussing a few things that you can start doing today to make sure you understand what you're studying much, much better. Hey there, only person watching YouTube. If you're new here, hi, my name is Ajay. I'm an Indian doctor in the UK. If you're already subscribed, welcome back. I love you to the stars and back. This is video 1 of a 3-video series titled The Most Effective Study Techniques, where I discuss how to understand what you study, remember what you study, and also how to focus better when you're studying. This video will be all about understanding what we study, and I'll make 2 other videos about how to remember what you've studied and how to focus when you study. So make sure you turn on the notifications to get a notification when that video goes live. But if you're watching this video a few weeks after this was published, those videos are probably already live, and I'll link it up somewhere here. Now, before we begin, I just want to stress on the importance of good study habits. Now, all of the things that we discuss here are going to be beneficial to you only if you make these a habit. Like, at least the techniques that work for you, if you make them a habit, that just makes it easier for you to inculcate that in your daily studying, and that just makes things much more effective. According to me, one can be good at academics and studying with 2 things. First, people with inherent gifts or talents. Some people are just born exceptionally brighter or exceptionally smarter, and these people usually don't need to put much effort in to succeed. If they put in a good amount of effort, it'll be easy for them to succeed. Second is people with good habits and hard work. Even below average students can shine, can perform really well if they have good study habits and hard work, and talented people can achieve much more success than they usually would if they have good study habits and hard work. So these 2 things combine to sort of, make someone either successful or not successful. Now, inherent gifts really matter a lot when there's an unequal distribution of talents. For example, in your primary school, that doesn't select students based on whether they are smart or not. If you're smarter than the others, it's quite easy to succeed, right? You don't need to put in much effort. It's simple. And not trying to flex, this is how it was for me in school. I think I was like one of the smartest kids in school, and it was just easy for me to top the class literally every year in my school. Like, I topped the class every year in my school. Again, not trying to flex. I'm trying to prove a point here. Please wait for it. I mean, I did study and I put in a bit of effort, but it was not that difficult to top the class because of the unequal distribution. Like, I was one of the smartest, so it was kind of easy for me to top the class every time. But then I moved to 11th grade, or first PU as we call it in my state, and my college had a very high cutoff for 10th grade marks, so they selected most of the toppers from 10th grade and they took them in. I think when I joined, the cutoff was around 95% or something like that. Now, as you can see, the playing field has suddenly become much more even. In fact, there were a lot many more people who had scored really better marks than me. So I was actually competing with a lot of smarter people. This is where I started to realize the importance of good study habits and smart work. And this is where I actually had to sort of put in a lot of effort to succeed, and not flexing, but I ended up having the best score in the entrance exam for the whole class. But med school was a whole different ball game. My med school was one of the top medical schools in my state, so all the top 250 rankers would go there. So as you can imagine, there were probably 249 more people who were probably as talented as I am, much more likely more talented or more inherently gifted or more hardworking than I am. And now the playing field was much, much more difficult. And at this point, success depended mostly on discipline, hard work, and good study habits. And I very clearly saw that people without good study habits scored quite terribly compared to people with good study habits. Now you have to understand the fact that this is a top medical college and it's the top 250 people from the entire state. So most of them are inherently talented. Most of them are really, really smart, but even then, the more successful ones are the ones who had really good study habits and the ones who had discipline. So that's exactly why I say good study habits are important. So what are the good study habits? That's what we're going to discuss today. And these are the habits that's going to help you understand what you study. The first thing is understanding the concept of frog's eye view versus bird's eye view. Think about this for a second. A frog just sees what's right in front of it. It looks at the object very close to it, and it can closely analyze and look at all the intricate details of the things that are right in front of it. Now think about a bird in flight. From the top, it can see the entire forest and it can analyze how to go from point A to point B. And when it wants to analyze something specific, it can always fly down, sit next to the object and analyze it closely, just like how a frog does. The problem with most students is they try to be like the frog. Without knowing where everything is located in the forest and without knowing how to get from point A to point B, they try to stick on to one thing, one topic, one specific topic, and they try to analyze it and learn it in detail. Or in other words, students tend to study very specific topics without even knowing where it comes in the grand scheme of that subject or that big topic. Exams also tend to test us based on the frog's eye view. They ask questions about very specific topics. So students also think that they need to study those specific topics because they're studying for the exam. So that's how they end up not understanding the whole subject. So in a way, they end up missing the forest for the trees. Instead, if students start to see the subject with a bird's eye view, they first see where the topic is in the whole forest, that is the subject. And once they have a good idea of where everything is in the subject, they can swoop down and come sit next to a topic, or basically pick a topic and study it in detail. So how to see a subject with a bird's eye view? That's where the concept of leaves on a tree comes in. Now imagine a tree, and the tree is the subject. The trunk of the tree is the main theme of the subject. The branches of the tree are like the subtopics or the big subheadings, and the leaves are like specific topics that you study. You have to learn to know where the leaves are attached to the branches and where the branches are attached to the trunk. The easiest way to do this is to scope the book, open the book, go through the topics and see where the topics is. You can start in the index and see where that specific topic is. For example, if I'm studying about TB, I can see whether it's in pulmonology or in gastroenterology. Is it lung TB that I'm studying about, or is it abdominal TB that I'm studying about? And then when you go to the topic, you go and see all the subheadings, the small title headings inside the chapter to see what all things are covered. For example, in a chapter about TB, there might be something like epidemiology, the natural history of the disease, and then the pathology and what drugs are given, the management and management of complications or something like that. So you basically get an idea of what to expect next, what all is covered in this chapter about TB. Well, if it's a chapter about TB, it could just be about treatment, or it could just be about the pathology, or it could be just about the microbiology part of it. So before you study, if you have an idea what is coming in the entire chapter, that will help you, sort of solidify and connect one thing to another. Also, if you have the time, you can make a map of the topics by categorizing them. This is something that I picked up by watching videos by Ali Abdal, who's my favorite study YouTuber. So the concept is very simple. You just draw out a subject map, either physically on a paper or on an iPad, and you keep connecting the concepts one to other or to the main concept. Kind of very similar to the leaves on a tree concept, but this time you actually, sort of write it down or draw it somewhere and, keep adding to it as you go further in that subject. So for example, if I were to study internal medicine, I would write internal medicine. This is very rough, just trying to give you an idea. And yeah, this would be at the center. And I would add subcategories like, say, this pulmonology and let's say gastroenterology. So under pulmonology, I would write subcategories like infectious diseases, cancers, congenital anomalies, occupational health, hyperactive lung, or Airway disorders. Now that we have it, because it's on an iPad, I can do something like this, and I can just pick a much smaller pen, and I can divide this infectious disease into bacterial, fungal, and viral, and I can further subdivide bacterial into many other things. And if I'm studying tuberculosis, I would add tuberculosis here, and I would write things about it, like what bacterium causes it, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, what is the treatment, what is DOTS, what is the, before that, what is the pathology, what is the presentation, what are the complications, what to do. You get the point. So I add like a few 4 to 5 points here. So I have sort of a map as to where everything is. Of course, this is a very terrible example of what I've written here because there's not much space to add other things, but this is sort of to give you a sort of an idea as to how to divide it. But when you're doing it, you might have to just take quite a large space to do it. Maybe if you're on an iPad, you can zoom in, zoom out, and you can write everything. And maybe you can have like the whole of infectious diseases on a separate page, or maybe the entire of pulmonology on a separate page or something like that. Do what works. But this is just a brief idea of how to connect the topics. So if I were to study TB again, I would know that TB is here. TB is bacterial. TB is an infectious disease of the lung. This is a very simplistic example, but you sort of get an idea of how to connect one thing to the other. So now that we've understood how to look at a subject and how to connect concepts together, let's understand a very specific technique on how to understand concepts. So this technique is none other than the Feynman technique. Richard Feynman was a professor of physics at Princeton and later at MIT. And he was this person who could explain very difficult concepts in physics in very simple terms to his students and also to the general public. And this is why he is also one of the most famous physicists or most famous physics professor of all time. So according to this technique, you study a concept from, like, say, a textbook or notes from lecture, whatever. You understand the concept and you have to explain this concept to a 5-year-old. You don't have to literally find a 5-year-old kid somewhere and explain the concept to him. The idea of this technique is to understand the concept and simplify it in your mind to such an extent that you should be able to explain it to a 5-year-old. Now, I personally feel that 5 years is too young an age to understand anything that we study. So the way I see it is that you should be able to explain that concept to someone your age who has no idea about that concept. So for example, if I study one topic from surgery, I'll try to explain it to one of my engineering or architecture friends. And I'd like to call this technique the modified Feynman technique, discovered by Ajay. Now, you don't also need to literally go and find someone and explain to them, but if you have a partner like that, that's great. That would be ideal. If you live with your parents or if you live with your friends who are not from the same field, you can probably explain to them. But a more practical, the more doable way is to imagine how you would explain it to someone else who has no idea about it. Or you can stand in front of a mirror and explain it as if you're talking to someone else and you're explaining the concept to them. And while doing this, you pick up places, facts, and concepts that you don't know well enough to explain it in a simple way. So if you're not able to explain it in a simple way, that means you have not completely understood that concept. So what do you do now? You go back, you study that concept again, and repeat the whole process again. Or if you don't want to do any of this, the other thing that you can do is to write a simplified summary of all the concepts that you have just learned. The idea of this summary is to make it as simple and easy to understand as possible. And if your engineer student steals your notebook, he should be able to understand medicine. Now, I know this sounds like a lot of work, but this is a bulletproof way of making sure that you understand everything that you study. Understanding what you study is the basis of how you succeed in exams, in study exams, work, and probably in life as well. So to give an example, say I were to study about asthma for the very first time, I would explain it to my friend Mayank like this. The air that we breathe goes into the lungs through the windpipe, so the windpipe needs to be patent to allow air to pass through without any impediments. There are many chemicals in the windpipe which decide how much the windpipe has to open. Some chemicals close it and some chemicals open it. Asthma is a disorder where certain things like allergens or cold weather or exercise can lead to release of the chemicals that lead to closure of the windpipe. So because the windpipe is constricted, it makes it difficult for the person to breathe, and the more constricted it is, the more difficult it becomes for the person to breathe. And sometimes in very severe asthma, people have died by just because their airway is so constricted that they can't breathe. So the way we treat this is to give medications that open up the windpipe, allowing the person to breathe easy again. Now, this was a very simplistic example. This would be how you would explain asthma to someone if you were studying about asthma for the very first time, like say in 10th grade or 11th grade or high school, whatever. As a medical student, if you're studying about asthma, your explanation would obviously be in much more detail, and as a practicing doctor, my explanation would be in much more detail. So do this exercise for the central themes of the chapter. Of course, you can't do it for every single subtopic discussed in a chapter. That would be too tedious. Use it to explain the central theme, or use it as a summary of the entire chapter. So those were the techniques on how to understand what you study. And like I mentioned, I'll be making videos about how to remember what you've studied and also how to focus better when you're studying. So if you haven't turned the notifications on, please turn it on if you'd like to see those videos when they're up. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.